In the cold, gray light of a November morning in the Greater Toronto area, Mark sat in his driveway, staring at a steering wheel he didn't truly own. To the outside world, Mark was the definition of Canadian success. He was a senior project manager, earning exactly $120,000 a year. In any other decade, or perhaps in any other country, that number would have guaranteed a life of luxury, leisure, and a robust retirement fund. But here, in the shadow of the CN Tower, that six-figure salary had become a gilded cage. There is a shadow fact that the Canadian government and big banks don't want you to calculate: the mathematical impossibility of the middle class. While the headlines talk about inflation percentages, they ignore the compounding erosion of the Canadian soul. Mark wasn't blowing his money on bottle service or tropical vacations. He was doing everything right. He went to school, got the high-paying job, and bought into the Canadian dream. Yet, as he looked at his banking app, the balance was a haunting reflection of a systemic failure. This is the story of how $120,000 became the new $40,000, and why, if you don't understand the invisible forces draining your account, you might be next. The loop starts here. Why does a high income feel like a slow-motion bankruptcy?
The first bite doesn't come from the landlord or the grocery store. It comes from the hand that feeds you. When Mark's $10,000 monthly gross pay hits the system, the CRA is already standing at the door with an open palm. In Canada, we pride ourselves on our social safety nets, but for the $120K earner, the tax bracket is a brutal realization. By the time federal and provincial taxes are sliced away, followed by CPP and EI contributions that seem to climb every year, Mark's $10,000 has withered into roughly $6,800. Think about that. Before he even pays for a single liter of gas or a loaf of bread, nearly 35% of his labor has evaporated into the machinery of the state. This is the tax trap, where you earn too much to receive government rebates like the GST/HST credit or the Canada Child Benefit, but you don't earn enough to utilize the complex tax havens used by the ultra-wealthy. Mark is stuck in the productive middle, the demographic that pays the most in and gets the least back. He watches as his high salary is gutted before it even reaches his pocket. But the real pain isn't just the tax. It's what happens when that remaining $6,800 meets the most expensive housing market in North American history. How can a man who earns more than 85% of the population feel like he's living paycheck to paycheck? Housing in Canada has transitioned from a human right to a speculative asset class, and for Mark, it was his largest recurring nightmare. Living in a modest two-bedroom condo in Mississauga, his mortgage payments, reset at the new Bank of Canada interest rates, swallowed $3,400 of his remaining $6,800. Add in the $600 condo fees that cover a gym he's too tired to use, and a concierge who just collects the Amazon packages he can no longer afford, and half of his take-home pay is gone. This is the visceral reality of the GTA and GVA. You aren't buying a home, you are servicing a debt to a bank that views you as a line item. Mark remembers when his parents bought a four-bedroom house on a single income of $45,000. Today, that same house is worth $1.4 million, and his $120,000 salary can't even get him a townhouse in a safe neighborhood. The math has broken. Every time Tiff Macklem speaks at the Bank of Canada, Mark's stomach churns. A 0.25% hike isn't just a statistic, it's the difference between a family dinner at a restaurant and another night of boxed pasta. He is house poor in a country that used to be known for its vast, affordable spaces. But the mortgage is just the base layer of the crisis. Wait until he walks into the local Loblaws. Walking into a Loblaws or a Sobeys in 2024 feels like a mugging where you have to scan your own items at the end. Mark pushes his cart through aisles where a single block of cheese is $12, and a bag of grapes feels like a luxury investment. The Loblaws trap is the psychological warfare of Canadian grocery oligopolies. Despite his $120K salary, Mark finds himself checking the Flash Food app for expiring meat and opting for the no-name brand just to keep his weekly grocery bill under $250 for his family. That's $1,000 a month just to eat. He sees the record profits posted by these grocery giants and feels a simmering rage that many Canadians now share. It's the feeling of being squeezed from every direction. The $120,000 salary was supposed to mean steak. Instead, it means carefully portioned ground beef.
He realizes that inflation isn't just a number on the news, it's the shrinking size of his cereal box and the rising price of the milk inside it. The shadow fact here is that food inflation for the middle class is often double the reported CPI because the goods we actually need, protein, fresh produce, are the ones skyrocketing. As he taps his credit card at the terminal, he wonders, if he's struggling on six figures, how is the rest of the country even surviving?
Lifestyle creep is often blamed for the downfall of high earners, but in Canada, it's often survival creep. Mark doesn't drive a Porsche. He drives a 5-year-old Honda CRA. But in the GTA, even that is a luxury. Between the $250 monthly insurance premium, among the highest in the world, and the $80 Phillips at the Shell station, his transportation costs are a relentless drain. He needs the car to get to the office, because public transit would turn his 40-minute commute into a 2-hour odyssey. This is the Canadian tax on time. We are forced into expensive car ownership because our infrastructure is decades behind. Mark calculates that between gas, insurance, maintenance, and the car loan, he is paying $900 a month just for the privilege of driving to a job that pays for the car. It's a circular trap. He feels the weight of the 401 highway, the literal and metaphorical congestion of a life lived in transit. The Canadian dream used to be about the open road. Now it's about sitting in gridlock, watching your fuel gauge drop along with your bank balance. And yet, the most dangerous part of Mark's financial life isn't what he's spending. It's what he's failing to save. The RRSP illusion is about to reveal its teeth.
Mark was told to contribute to his RRSP to save on taxes, but this is the RRSP illusion that catches many Canadians off guard. He dutifully puts $500 a month into his registered retirement savings plan, hoping for a big tax refund. But that money is locked away, inaccessible without heavy penalties, while his current life is on fire. He's saving for a 65-year-old version of himself, while the 35-year-old version is drowning in the present. Furthermore, the tax refund he receives is often just a temporary loan from the government. He'll have to pay it all back, and more, when he eventually withdraws it in a future where taxes will likely be even higher. He looks at his RRSP balance and realizes it's a paper wealth. He can't use it to pay for his daughter's dental surgery or the sudden leak in his roof without the CRA taking a massive cut immediately. He's rich on a spreadsheet, but broke in his daily life. The lack of liquidity is a silent killer of the Canadian middle class. We are encouraged to lock our capital away in products that benefit the bank's assets under management, while we turn to high-interest lines of credit to cover our actual emergencies. This leads to the most dangerous tool in the Canadian financial arsenal, the HELOC. When the cash flow dried up, Mark did what every responsible Canadian does. He opened a line of credit. It felt like free money at first, a $50,000 safety net at a low interest rate. But as the Bank of Canada began its aggressive hiking cycle, that low rate jumped from 3% to 9%. Suddenly, the interest alone was $400 a month. Mark is now paying interest on the groceries he ate 3 years ago and the car repairs he forgot about. This is the debt cycle that is hollowing out the country. Canadians have the highest household debt-to-income ratio in the G7, and Mark is the poster child for this statistic. He is working 40-plus hours a week not to build a future, but to service the ghosts of his past spending. The psychological weight is immense. Every morning he wakes up, he owes more than he did the night before. He's running on a treadmill that's speeding up, while the floor is being tilted higher. The line of credit, once a safety net, has become a noose. He realizes that $120,000 isn't enough to outrun the compound interest of a nation built on credit. But why does he keep spending? The answer lies in the social comparison trap of the digital age. Every time Mark scrolls through Instagram, he sees his peers from Western or U of T posting photos of their new homes in Oakville or their ski trips to Whistler. In Canada, we have a unique, polite competition. We don't talk about money, but we display it through our properties and our children's extracurriculars. Mark feels the pressure to enroll his kids in $500 a month competitive hockey and $200 a month tutoring. To say no would be to admit he is failing the Canadian dream. This social tax is the cost of maintaining the appearance of a $120K lifestyle when the math no longer supports it. He's buying status on credit because in a country with no clear class structure, your possessions are your only identity. He wonders if everyone else is faking it too, or if he's the only one who missed a secret memo on how to survive.
The reality is that most of those peers are also one paycheck away from disaster, hidden behind a veneer of Sherwin-Williams agreeable gray paint and quartz countertops. The curiosity gap here is, what happens when the veneer finally cracks? For Mark, it happened on a Tuesday afternoon with a simple check engine light.
The check engine light was the catalyst for the final descent, a $2,200 repair bill for a faulty transmission. In a healthy economy, a man earning $120,000 would have an emergency fund for this. But Mark's emergency fund was his already maxed line of credit. This is the fragility fact. A massive portion of Canada's high earners are exactly one $2,000 shock away from total insolvency. He sat in the dealership waiting room, drinking the free bit of Haffy, and realized he didn't have the money. He had to put the repair on a high-interest credit card at 21.99%. Now, the debt was compounding even faster. The stress began to manifest physically: tightness in the chest, restless nights, and a shorter temper with his family. He was a high-functioning executive by day and a panicked debtor by night. He started looking for ways to cut back, but where? He couldn't stop eating, he couldn't stop heating his home in a Canadian winter, and he couldn't stop paying the CRA. The middle-class squeeze isn't a slow pressure, it's a series of sudden, violent shocks that eventually break the foundation. He began to question the very system he was told would protect him. Then came the side hustle trap. Desperate, Mark tried to drive for Uber on weekends. He thought he could bridge the gap with an extra $1,000 a month, but he quickly discovered the Canadian success penalty. Every dollar he earned on Uber was taxed at his highest marginal rate, nearly 43%. After gas, commercial insurance, and the wear and tear on his vehicle, he was essentially working for $8 an hour. He was trading the precious few hours he had with his children for a pittance that the government would eventually claw back at tax time. This is the heartbreaking reality for many Canadians. The harder you work, the more the system takes. It discourages ambition and rewards stagnation. Mark was exhausted. He was working 60 hours a week between his main job and his hustle, yet his debt was still growing. He felt like a ghost in his own home, a provider who provided nothing but a paycheck that vanished into the ether. He realized that working harder was a lie sold to the middle class to keep them productive, while the wealth gap widened into a canyon. He was losing his mind, and his marriage was beginning to show the strain of financial infidelity.
Financial stress is the leading cause of divorce in Canada, and Mark's household was no exception. Every conversation with his wife, Sarah, turned into a debate about needs versus wants. Do the kids really need new winter boots? Can we skip the dental cleaning this month? These are the questions being asked in six-figure households across the country. The invisible cost of the disappearing middle class is the erosion of the family unit. When parents are stressed about Loblaws prices and mortgage renewals, they aren't present for their children. The anxiety is a heavy fog that settles over the dinner table. Mark and Sarah stopped dreaming about the future and started just trying to survive the week. They were living in a quiet crisis. There were no protesters in the streets for the 120K earners, no government subsidies for the wealthy who were broke. They were the forgotten demographic, too rich for help, too poor for comfort. The curiosity gap deepens. How many families in your neighborhood are one argument away from a permanent split because of a bank balance?
Mark's TFSA, the tax-free savings account, was empty. It was supposed to be the ultimate Canadian wealth-building tool, but how can you contribute to a TFSA when you're using your credit card to buy milk? This is the opportunity gap. The wealthy use their TFSAs to grow tax-free fortunes, while the middle class uses theirs as a high-interest savings account that they constantly drain for emergencies, like car tires or property tax hikes. Mark realized that he was missing out on the greatest bull market in history because he had no dry powder. He was watching the stock market soar while he was stuck in the mud. The Canadian system is designed to reward those who already have capital and punish those who are trying to earn it through labor. Mark's $120,000 was active income, the most heavily taxed and least protected form of wealth. He began to see the shadow fact clearly. In Canada, you don't get rich by working, you get rich by owning. And since he was too busy working to pay for what he owned on paper, he was actually getting poor every single day. Tax season in Canada is a time of reckoning, and for Mark, it was a disaster. Because he had earned a small bonus at work, a reward for his performance, he was pushed into a higher tax bracket and ended up owing the CRA $4,000. He didn't have it. The bonus paradox is a uniquely Canadian pain. You work harder, you get a bonus, and you end up with less liquid cash because the withholdings are calculated incorrectly or the clawbacks kick in. Mark had to take out yet another loan just to pay his taxes. He was literally borrowing money at 10% interest to pay a government that was already taking 35% of his income. The absurdity of the situation finally broke his spirit. He sat at his kitchen table with a stack of T4s and felt a profound sense of betrayal. He had followed the rules, he had played the game, but the game was rigged against the player in the middle. He began to look for an exit, but in Canada, where do you go? Every province was facing the same crisis. BC was more expensive, the Maritimes had no jobs, and the prairies were getting hit by the same national inflation.
The used car market scam was the next blow. When his wife's car finally gave up the ghost, they looked for a replacement. A 3-year-old used car was now selling for more than its original MSRP. Interest rates on used car loans were hovering at 12%. Mark realized that the basic components of a middle-class life, a home, 2 cars, and a modest vacation, now required a household income of at least $250,000 in the GTA. His $120,000 was a relic of a vanished era. He was living in a time warp where his salary was from 2024, but the costs were from 2035. The relatable pain here is the feeling of being a failure despite being objectively successful. He felt like he was gaslighting himself. "I make 6 figures, I should be fine," he would tell himself. But the bank account doesn't lie. The bank account is the ultimate arbiter of truth, and it was screaming that he was broke. He started to see the disappearing middle class not as a headline, but as a personal tragedy. He was the man in the middle, and the walls were closing in. Mental burnout in Canada is often treated as a psychological issue, but for Mark, it was an economic one. The cost of living is also a cost of sanity. He found himself unable to concentrate at work, his mind constantly running through spreadsheets and what-if scenarios. What if interest rates go up another 1%? What if the furnace breaks? What if I get laid off? In the new Canada, there is no margin for error. One mistake, one bout of bad luck, and the whole house of cards collapses. This zero-margin life is the reality for the 120K earner. You are too rich for the safety net and too poor for a cushion. He started seeing a therapist, covered by his work benefits, thankfully, only to realize that the therapist was also struggling with her mortgage in Burlington. It was a national contagion of financial dread. The curiosity gap. If the people we pay to help us are also drowning, who is actually steering the ship? The realization was terrifying. No one was coming to save him. The retirement mirage began to fade. Mark looked at his CPP, Canada Pension Plan statement, and realized that even at the maximum payout, it wouldn't even cover his current condo fees, let alone food or healthcare. The OAS, Old Age Security, was a pittance. He had been told his whole life that Canada was a place where you work hard and then you are taken care of. But the shadow fact is that the current system was designed when there were 6 workers for every 1 retiree. Now that ratio is collapsing. Mark realized he would likely have to work until he was 75, not because he wanted to, but because he had to. The golden years were looking more like rust years. He saw elderly people working the self-checkout stations at the grocery store and realized he was looking at his own future. This is the visceral fear that keeps the Canadian middle class up at night, the realization that the finish line is being moved further away every time you get close to it.
Mark decided to look into downsizing. He thought if he sold the condo and moved to a smaller town, he'd be free. But the downsizing myth in Canada is a trap. Small towns like Guelph, Barrie, or even Kingston had seen their prices explode as people fled the GTA. By the time he paid the 5% real estate commission, the land transfer tax, and the moving costs, he would have very little equity left, and his new mortgage in a cheaper town would still be massive because interest rates had tripled since he first bought. There was no escape hatch left in the Canadian real estate market. The disappearing middle class was being funneled into a smaller and smaller corner of the country. He felt like a prisoner in his own province. The curiosity gap. When the escape hatch is locked, what do? You start to look at the system itself.
you start to ask why Canada, a land of infinite resources, had become a land of infinite scarcity for its own citizens. The breaking point came during a parent-teacher interview. The teacher mentioned a school trip to Ottawa that would cost $800. Mark had to tell his son he couldn't go. The look of disappointment on his child's face was more painful than any CRA audit or Loblaws receipt. It was the moment he realized his $120K salary was a failure of a promise he made to his family. He wasn't just broke financially, he was broke as a provider. This is the emotional pain that the statistics can't capture. It's the death of 1,000 cuts, the small no's that add up to a life of limitation. He realized that the Canadian middle class was no longer a reality. It was a ghost of a country that no longer existed. The relatable life he was living was one of quiet desperation, masked by a decent title and a clean car. He finally decided to stop faking it. He sat Sarah down and they made a radical plan. Not a plan to save more, but a plan to live differently.
The radical plan was financial nihilism. Mark realized that the old rules, RRSPs, TFSAs, high-paying corporate jobs, were designed for a world that died in 2019. He stopped trying to keep up with the Oakville crowd. They sold the SUV and bought a 10-year-old Corolla for cash. They canceled every subscription, from Netflix to the gym. They stopped saving for a retirement that the system would likely inflate away anyway, and started focusing on cash flow in the now. He took a lower-paying job that allowed him to work remotely from a much cheaper region, even if it meant leaving his senior title behind. He stopped caring about the shadow fact of systemic failure and started focusing on personal sovereignty. He realized that $120K in the GTA was a prison sentence, but $80K in a rural community, if he could find one with internet, might actually be freedom. But the transition wasn't easy. The system is designed to keep you in the GTA, close to the taxable centers and the high-interest banks.
This is the systemic issue at the heart of Canada. Our economy is 3 banks and a bunch of real estate agents in a trench coat. We don't innovate. We just trade houses back and forth and tax the people who do the actual work. Mark's journey from $120K to broke to recovering is a blueprint for the modern Canadian. The curiosity gap here is, why are we okay with this? Why do we accept that a 6-figure earner can't afford a life? We have been conditioned to believe that if we are struggling, it's our fault, that we bought too much avocado toast or didn't grind hard enough. But the truth is, the middle class is being intentionally hollowed out to service the debts of a nation that overspent its future. Mark realized he wasn't a failure. He was a victim of a mathematical certainty. The shadow fact is that the Canadian dollar is being devalued faster than your salary can ever grow. If you don't change your lifestyle to one of radical independence, the system will consume you. The path out for Mark wasn't through a promotion or a lottery win, it was through subtraction. He learned that in Canada, the only way to win is to stop playing the game by the government's rules. He started a small, cash-based side business that the CRA couldn't easily track. He started growing his own vegetables to bypass Loblaws. He joined a local barter community. He stopped being a consumer and started being a citizen. This is the relatable life of the future, a return to localism and self-reliance. He still earns a good living, but he no longer measures his success by his gross income. He measures it by his retained freedom. He realized that the $120K salary was a carrot on a stick, and he was the donkey. By letting go of the carrot, he finally got off the treadmill. But he looks back at his friends in Toronto and sees them still running, their faces pale, their debt mounting, their lives passing them by in a blur of 401 traffic and grocery store anxiety. So here is the final shadow fact you need to hear. $120,000 a year in Canada is only rich if you don't have to buy the life that comes with it. If you are starting from zero today, that salary is a survival wage. The curiosity gap I leave you with is this. If the middle class is disappearing and the high earners are struggling, what happens to the social fabric of this country in 5 years? We are at a tipping point. Mark found his way out by leaving the system, but not everyone can. The question isn't whether you can earn more, it's whether you can keep what you earn. As you look at your own bank account tonight, ask yourself, are you working for your money, or is your money working for the bank, the CRA, and Loblaws? The Canadian dream isn't dead, but it has changed. It's no longer about a big house in the suburbs. It's about having the courage to walk away from a system that is designed to keep you broke at 6 figures. What will you choose? The gilded cage or the uncertain freedom? The clock is ticking, and the interest